Welcome to lesson 2 of our Java series. So, lesson 1 was installing a compiler. A compiler, just to review, is a software where you're going to write code and run it. So, for my examples, I'll be using Eclipse as a compiler. There are many different compilers. You could use VS Code, for example, and there's a ton more as well. You could also write code on your web. There are some websites on the web where you can run code, so that's a great option as well. Additionally, we printed our first statement, which was printing hello world. So today we'll be diving deeper into print statements. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be learning about the variables in different data types. Then we'll be going on and learning further about print statements and collecting user inputs. Then we'll be looking at different operators and some naming conventions that coders usually follow. If you have questions throughout this video or even about our prior lesson, feel free to comment below and I'll reach and answer your questions as soon as possible. So let's begin with variables and data types. So just to get our basics clear, we'll be first reviewing what variables are. So variables are like objects that store a specific data. So for example, let's think about a box. So I have a box here. And what this box is representing is actually a variable. And so a data type is something that defines what kind of data is stored inside a variable. So in this case, what kind of data is stored in this box? Well, there are two types of data types. There are primitive types that include the int, double, char, and boolean. So the int and double are numbers. Int is a whole number, double is a float, which is like a decimal. And then we have boolean, which is what it sounds like, it's true or false. Then we have string. String is a reference type and usually it has words, letters. So it's like letters, not numbers. It's not numerical. And then we have char. Char isn't used as much as int, double, boolean, and string are, so we're going to be focusing on those four. So for example, in this variable box, I want to store ints. So I'll write an int for defining my data type. You always have to define your data type in Java, unlike in Python. If you have been coding in Python, you'll notice that in Python you do not need to define your data types. And then there are also naming conventions. So a variable is always named. So let's name this variable because it's storing an integer. We can say store int. I don't know why that line appeared, but that's okay. We know we're trying to say store int, and we're defining that the variable is named store int. So notice that we have camel case. This means that if you have two words in a variable, you can't put a space in between. So what it means is that you have the first word, which has a lowercase letter it's starting with, and then the second word has a capital letter. And this is a common coding convention that many coders use, but it isn't required. It's just a good way to organize yourself. And then make sure to have meaningful names because when you have long codes, it's easy to get lost with what different variables are. And so make sure to have a meaningful name. So for in this example, we have store int, um, which tells me that, oh yeah, this variable is responsible for storing an int value. But keep in mind that variables can be named anything. So this variable could have been named pumpkin, it could have been named pencil, anything at all. It's just important to name it in a meaningful way. So now moving on to a quick practice of variables so you could see it be defined in a um, compiler. So I will be for example, I will be showing you how to create variables for your name, for your age, for liking Java or not, which would be a boolean, for GPA, which is usually a double, which means it's decimal, and your favorite letter. All right, so let's get started with writing our variables. So right now you see the project from last time, or you will see it's like blank window. So we'll go to File, and we need to open a new project. So I'll go into New, I'll open a Java project. Same as last time, we'll put in a project name. So I'm going to do Java Lesson 2. You may put in whatever name you feel is best suited for this job. Really does not matter. And we'll click Finish. Now in the Java project, you need, I'm going to have another Java project. This will be named Variable Work, so that we know that, this was for variables if we need to refer back to it. Then inside, oh no, oops, we wanted to create a class, so I'm going to delete this, and I'm actually going to create a class inside Java 2, not a Java project. We'll create a Java class, and the class will be named variable practice or variable work, as I named last time. Any of it works. Doesn't matter as long as you are getting the right message across. Does it already exist? We'll do variable work. You do not need to put in a package. We'll just be using a default package. And then make sure to click the public static void checkbox. This will just write a main function for us so that we don't have to write it, and it is faster. You can also click generate comments if you want automatic comments made. I won't be selecting that. All right. So we already have variable practice. I don't know how we have that, but I will take that out. So here's our variable work class. So the first thing that we need to define, the first variable, is going to be our name. So name is going to be a string because it will be letters. So we'll have string and whatever we want to define it as. So let's say name, since that is what this variable is storing. And we'll say equals whatever your name is. So for this episode, I'll put in Madness and More, which will be the name. And then always make sure to end your line of code with a semicolon. So this is what it would look like to define a string variable. Now notice there is a squiggly line, a yellow squiggly line under name, and that's because my name variable isn't being used anywhere. It isn't because you have an error, it's just because it hasn't been used anywhere. So the next part that we were told to define is the age. Now age is going to be an int because while you can be 6.5 years old, most people just say they're 6 years old. So we'll say int, which is how you define an int variable, and we'll say age is equal to how many years it's been for Madness and More. That's about 5 years. So we'll do 5 semicolon. So notice the difference. So when you're defining string or using letters, you need these quotes. But if you are defining, like storing an integer or a number or a numerical value, you do not need the quotes. So keep that in mind, because if you do put in quotes, that usually makes that part a string. So the next thing that we wanted to define was liking Java or not. So this will be a boolean. A boolean, remember, is true or false. So we'll do boolean likes Java. So notice the camel characters here. We have the first word is starting with lowercase l, and then the second is capital J. And we'll equal this to true. We like Java. So actually true would be lowercase true. There we go. And then we will look at the next thing. So that's how you define a boolean. Next, we need to define our GPA. So most people's GPAs are going to be a double. So this can be any double, really. So let's put in double GPA is equal to anything that you want to say. I'll just say, for example, 200.1, even though this isn't a real GPA, but it works for our purposes since it's a double. Next is our favorite one, I believe. It's char. It's a favorite letter. So char, I haven't dived as deep into it, but char is a single character. So it could be a string, it could be the dollar sign, it could be really anything. So I will just show a quick example of what char could look like. So this would be favorite letter, but I'm going to show you the percent sign because the percent sign really isn't used that much. Oops. It really isn't, it can't be stored in that many variable types as it can be in char. So char you can use it in. So I will also show you how to get rid of errors now. So if you have a red squiggly line like this, you can always hover over it and it'll tell you, oh, what's going on in this error. So it says there's a syntax error on this token, and so I should press F2 for focus. Okay. Alright, so it's not telling me that my syntax error is on this, so I will now fix this error because I know that that was the place where I had my error. So even though this isn't a favorite letter, I'm just trying to show you that it can really store any kind of symbol. But since this is a favorite letter, we'll do M for mathness and more. Alright, so now you're probably wondering, okay, I have these variables, what do I even do with these variables? Well, usually what you do with these variables is that you could use them for like for loops or if statements, which we'll be which we'll be learning in our next episode. But you could also print the values that are stored in those variables out. So let's go ahead and do System.out.print, and we'll print, for example, likes Java. So when I run my code, I will get the value that is stored in likes Java, which is true. You could do this with any type of variable. Let's do it with GPA to get a good idea. So we'll have a numerical value too. And then it prints out 200.1. Now, let's say that I wanted to change the value of GPA. That can happen, right? Well, I can always go into my code and I can say, all right, so GPA is equal to GPA plus 5. Now you're wondering, that doesn't look right. How can GPA equal the value of GPA plus 5? Well, that's not what this line of code really means. The equal sign is more of an arrow pointing towards the variable saying the value that is stored in GPA plus 5 should now be stored in GPA. It is not saying that they're equal. It is just saying that the value on this side is going to be stored into the variable on this side. So the value on this side is stored into the variable on that side. So now if I print GPA, it'll equal 200 5.1 instead of the original 200.1 that I defined because it added a 5. So that's also another way to use your variables. So now getting into print statements, we'll be looking into printing and scanner input. So let's first look at printing versus system, so print ln versus print statements. Also be working with string, like printing and print ln. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this code out. You could delete it if you want as well, but I'm just going to comment it out. So how to comment multiple lines of code out? You click Control / and then everything is commented out. A comment is a double slash in Java. All right. So now we're going to be looking at the difference between System.out.println versus print. So I'm going to type out code. This will be like a little lab for us, and then we can look at the differences. So first, let us look at println. So System.out.println, which is like print line, and it'll say hello. And then on the next line, we'll look at System.out.println. We'll do world. All right, so let's run this piece of code and see what happens. So we get hello world typed out in 2 different lines. So my first observation is that the statement System.out.println is going to print whatever I put in the parentheses for that function. And then I also notice that it is printing on separate lines. It's not printing hello world on the same line. Okay, well, the next thing I'm going to print is a blank space just so that we can separate what I'm going to print next and this. So I'm going to go print ln, and then I'm going to have blank parentheses with quotes, space, and I'll put a semicolon. So what this line of code is to create a space between 2 different statements being printed. So comments are also important to type out when you are writing code and you want to look back and understand code. We'll also be looking at Java doc comments later in the series, which are documentation comments that are important in Java, especially if you are sharing your code with the rest of the world. But now, getting back to print statements, we'll look at System.out.print. So what is different in that? And I will say hello again. And then in the next line, we'll have System.out.print. And we'll have world. So it has the slightest difference. The first 2 state lines of code had ln at the end of the print statements, and then this segment has just print. But it's going to have a significant difference in the results of the code. So we notice that print ln prints on 2 different lines versus print just squeezes hello world together, smushes it all together. And then we see the little space that was the result of line 16. Okay, so now what we're going to do is way more complicated than what we've done before. So let's look into it. So the first thing that we are going to do is just comment this out. We're looking into input now, so user input and reading it. So this is a bit more complicated because we'll be importing the scanner and then we'll be using the scanner. So at the very top of your code, just put in import java.util.scanner, and we'll say semicolon after that. So that imports our scanner that we need to read our input. So now I will go down. Next thing I want to do is I want to define scanner in here. So we'll have scanner input. So input is equal to new scanner system dot in. So essentially what this line of code is doing is it has a scanner, and the scanner is named input, and then we're creating a new scanner who is here. So now what we're going to be doing is we have to give the user a statement, right? So let's first look at how to read a string line. So how you would read a whole line of text is you would go string name. So that's just our variable that the input of the user after being read is being stored in. So after the computer reads what the user has said, it will store it in the variable name. So we have next line, and this is the portion that is going to read the one line of code, the whole line of code. The next read statement that we have is to read an integer. So to store this, you need an int variable, and we'll say int age, and int age. So to store that, you need input dot next int. So this line of code will be reading any integer in the user input. Then we'll have a double. So double input needs to be stored in a double variable, and we'll name it price. We'll do price for this one. We'll have it equal input dot next double. So notice that this is also using camel case. So that's how you would read a double. And then how you would read a boolean is you would have a variable that stores boolean, and then we'll have likes pizza, and I'll have it equal to input dot next boolean. So this is how you would define these inputs, like how to read the inputs. Now we need to give the user prompts so that they know what to input. So to do that, what I'll do is right above my input reading statements, I will put in lines of code that prompt the reader to answer these questions. So I'll say System.out.print, and then we'll say, oh no, we just have extra. Okay, print, or we'll say enter your name so that it's clear. Then I'll have colon space, and I'm just gonna copy this, and you'll need these input statements for like these print statements for each of the input reading statements because your user needs to know what they're entering. So let's say this one is age, so enter your age. Or actually, I'm going to change this to GPA since that was our old example. GPA here, and then we'll have the user enter their GPA. So a double can actually store a whole number as well. So it would be fine if they enter in like a 5 or like a 6, anything like that. But it would also be okay if they enter in a decimal since it is a double that it's reading. And then we'll do you like pizza, and then we'll go parentheses true or false. There we go. So after that, we want to print the summary, right? Because after the code reads all this information, what do you do with it? Well, we can print all of this out. So to print it, I will be using the System.out.println so that it's printing on different lines. And this will be, the first thing will be my summary. So we'll have our summary. This is like our mini project here. So you have the summary. Okay, there is an error. Do you want to take a look at that? So notice my quotes were outside the parentheses. They should always be inside the parentheses. And I will just be copying this. This will be using our print statements as well. So input statements and print statements really do go together. So we'll have the name, right, as it was stored in our variable. So I will say name so that when you have the summary, we know what it is actually going to print. A plus sign. You always need the plus sign for concatenation, which is joining a string with another string or number. So we'll have name here, it's a variable. And then for the next line, we want their age. So age, colon, and then plus age. So it concatenates the age string with the age value. And then we'll have another print statement, which will be printing the GPA of this person. And I will have plus GPA. And then we'll have likes pizza. So System.out.println. And I will go likes pizza. Plus likes pizza. There we go. So now we have all of our summary for the results out. So let's try running the code now. So notice how it prompts me to enter different things. So first it asks me to enter my name. So I'll say Mathness and more. And then when I click enter, it'll ask me for my next answer. So I'll say 5, enter. Then it asks me for the GPA, 200.1, enter. Do I like pizza, true or false? I'll say true. And then it prints out the summary with the name, the age, the GPA, and likes pizza or not. So the whole summary of this is that input statements need print statements. And then you also need to import your scanner in order to use the input, because your scanner is going to look through everything that your user is entering. All right, so now let's look at some operators in Java. So the first, let's look at arithmetic operators. So the plus sign operator is to add different integers or doubles. Um, the minus sign that you see here is to subtract different integers or doubles or floats. Um, what you see here is the multiplication, and then this is the division sign to divide two integers or doubles. And then what you see over here might be a new one. This is called the mod. So what the mod does is that after division, it returns the remainder. So here's an example. For example, I have, this is for the mod, so I have 6 divide by 2. So this was my division. And let's say this, I'm actually going to use the real division so that we are not confused, because this is not code. This is just trying to explain. So here we have 6, and I'm going to divide this by 2. Now the answer for that is going to be 3, and my remainder is going to be 0. So my mod sign, what it would have returned is it would have returned a 0. So what it would have returned. Now, let's say we had, I'll use a different color. Let's say we had 9 divided by 2. So 9 divided by 2, you might say is 4.5, but but mod, what it's going to do is it's going to only divide out the part that can be divided out. So 8 can be divided out of 9, right? So if 8 can be divided out of 9, that would be 4, so I'll have 4. And then we have a remainder of 1. Because after dividing 8 by 2, you get 4, and then you have a remainder of 1. So mod would have returned 1. So the mod returns the remainder, basically. So if I do, let's do an example here. So let's say 9. Okay, that, no bueno. Okay. Here's my pen. Okay, so let's say I had 9 mod 2. This would return, actually, I do not want to use the equal sign because in coding it means something totally different. So we'll say it would return to you 1. Whereas 6 mod 2 would return a 0. Okay? So that's your different arithmetic functions or operators. Then you have your comparison operators. The comparison operators are a bit different. So these are usually used in if statements or conditional statements. Now the equal actually means equal. So earlier in the video, we looked at how just the equal sign is used to assign a value, but when there are two equal signs, that actually means that they're equal. So let's say let's say I have an integer x that I have defined. So I'm writing some code here. I have integer x, and it is equal to 6. So what that means is that so variable x, that is an integer, has the value 6 stored in it. If I do, let's go into some kind of conditional work. if I do this, then it would be true that x plus 2 is equal to 8. So if this were in an if statement, the result would be true because the comparison is true that they are equal. Then you have the exclamation mark and equal sign next to it. This means not equal to. So um, x in the older example was not equal to, okay, x, and it was equal to 6 in the earlier example, was not equal to 9. It was equal to 6. And then this operator here and this operator here, both of those are greater than or less than. And then the operators next to them are greater than, equal to, and less than equal to. Then we have some of the logical statements. So what the triple and means, so what this means is that for if statements, if you have two conditions and you want them both satisfied, you would say and between them. And then if you just wanted one of the two conditions satisfied, you would use the two lines, which are the or statements. So we'll be practicing examples of this further in the if statements and for loops and conditionals when we learn about them in the next episode. So I wanted to slightly introduce these, especially the arithmetic operators, but the comparison and logical operators are mostly used with conditional statements. So we'll look at them further in the next episode. Now, let's look into some coding conventions. So, we went over the capital case for variables. That's how you name the variables. But also notice that class names always start with uppercase letters or capital letters. So, this is just how coders like to format their code. It isn't required, but this is how it's usually done. So, it looks a bit different if you don't follow the conventions. Make sure to have meaningful names. Again, this isn't something that is required, but it is very important, especially when you're writing longer codes so that you don't get lost in your code. Make sure to have clean indentation. So, unlike Python, Java does not require that you have indentation. Indentation does not matter in the running of the code, but clean indentation is important in um, knowing where your curly brackets end in for loops, if statements, different classes, once we get into more complicated code. Another thing to remember is always to comment your work. So while you're working on a project, remember to comment what each line of code is doing. You make sure to comment the more important lines of code so that when you're looking back at the code, it is easy to change and modify. So now we have a mini project. You can pause the video and you can write code for this. So ask a user for the name, the age, the favorite number, and if they like pizza. Remember, we kind of went over this, but this time try it by yourself and you can go back and check. Compute the age plus 5. So once they return an age, add 5 to that age. And then once they have their double favorite number, make sure it's a double for the favorite number. You can also add 5 to that. And then we're going to print a summary. So pause the video and then I will show you the results of what the code could look like. Remember, there are multiple examples, but I will show you um, a, a template or an example of how we learned in this episode. Okay, so I have the results from my code in this segment. So this is my little project. So I'm going to run it, and then we'll make sure it's working right. So the name, as you were asked to ask the user, madness and more. My age, I'll put in as 5. The favorite number, I'll put in as 200.1 since it's supposed to be a double. So when you're running your code, also enter these values in, the same ones I'm entering in, to see if you get the same results or not. And then I'll put in, let's do false this time since we did true last time. So my summary has appeared. The name is showing up as Madness and More. Notice that I entered 5 as my age, and I am receiving 10 now, so it added 5. And then for my favorite number, it was 200.1, but the result is 205.1. And then I said likes pizza, and I got the false. Now, so the way I added 5 into my code is in the print statements down below, but there are a few different ways to do that. So let's say that I hadn't added the 5 here. So I'll take that out. Okay, so let's say I didn't have the parentheses and the +5 in the print statement. How else could I added 5 to the age? Well, up above, I could have said age is equal to age plus 5, which we looked at earlier. So I feel like that's what we may have done. And then we'll have our favorite number, right? We also had to add 5 to that. So we'll say favorite number is equal to favorite number plus 5. All right. And then let's see if it also gives us the same input now, because I feel like many of us may have done this. So you don't have to type this into your code, but you may if you want to. In 5, 200.1, we'll do false. And it does add the 5. So you can do any of the iterations for code. Keep in mind there are multiple ways to do certain things. So you could always try different ways apart from what I show in these episodes. But the result is the same, and it's the result we're looking for. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at madnessandmore@gmail.com. You could also leave a comment down below. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps my channel and helps me bring more content like this to you.
Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.